Well, greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is still doing well, and welcome back to the second half of today's upload. Tonight, I have some terrifying Dogman and cryptid encounters to share with you. Before we get into it, a couple links. As you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, and my merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. The links to Patreon and PayPal are in the description below, my merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters Volume 1, 2, and 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeffrey Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, the links to which are also in the description as well. And last but not least, if you really want to help the channel to continue to grow and go, just simply hit subscribe and the like button. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's get on with today's upload. Shall we? Today's first terrifying cryptid encounter. Back when I was 15, so approximately 6 years ago now, my parents had sent me on a 2-month trip to a program called Anasazi. This program was for troubled youth with drug and mental problems, occasionally used as an alternative for juvenile detention. I was in this program because my parents had caught me smoking weed. During this time, you and 3 to 10 other teens and 3 adult supervisors called trail walkers would hike 150 miles around the Tonto Basin, moving in the day, sleeping at night. There were often no trails or roads. It was mainly bushwhacking through spiny plants and such. You get a vegetarian food pack that gets filled every week with a replacement of new leaders for the week, so they can bring the new food and lead us for that week. Now that you know where I was, let's get on to the experience. During the beginning of my time, it rained almost every other day. It was January in the northern parts of Arizona, so it was pretty cold. Our gear was constantly wet, especially my sleeping bag. It made it very difficult to make friction fires and stay sane, but we managed. It was my second week in, and several hours passed since the sun had went down, and all of the teens had went to bed. My sleeping bag was very wet, and I could not sleep well, so I gathered up my bag to dry over the campfire. Usually, the supervisors would sleep in shifts in the night, so there's always someone keeping watch. But for some reason, all 3 were still awake. I walked over and asked one of the leaders to hold the other end of my bag over the fire till it dried out. After several hours of drying, it got to be a manageable point, and I was going to go to sleep, but decided to hold the bag on my own over the fire and talk to the leaders. While we were talking about something I don't recall, we heard the most terrifying scream someone can imagine, directed towards us, not even 50 feet away in the black abyss beyond the trees. It was not a scream of terror. It was one in which to try to cause that to others. The scream sounded like an adult male mountain lion hybrid creature screaming at the top of its lungs to scare us. It sounded so angry, man-like, while sounding feral and guttural like a huge cat. The scream only lasted a second, just a quick, loud wah, then silence. We were all terrified. I remember seeing the leaders' faces, wide-eyed terror and worry while looking to see in my direction and my reaction. Although I was scared, I chuckled nervously and said, "WTF is that?" and tried to shrug it off as a cougar or some unknown animal to me, as I knew I would be staying 6 more weeks and did not want to think of scary creatures being out here. After some time, I collected myself and went to sleep. During this time, I've had heard of Skinwalkers once while on a church camp outing as a child, but thought it was a story to scare us kids. Years after this experience, the scream still haunts me. I began to research. No animals known to man make this particular scream, and especially in the way that it was done. It was like a man screaming, aimed at us, not some bobcat yelling at each other, or a cougar yell, or a coyote scream. One day, I found a plethora of Skinwalker content online and realized how the native people know these exist, and wonder if I had heard one. Compared to the scream I had heard, the supposed Skinwalker screams you can find online in videos sound fake and hilarious. Nothing I've heard in my life even closely resembles the scream I heard. It was so unique and terrifying. It was something horror movie directors can only imagine to have on the set. I'm unsure if this was exactly a Skinwalker, but I can assure you that I heard something that was not a known animal or human. Today's second encounter. Hello everyone. First of all, let me say that this is not an experience during which I saw anything. It was something that I had heard. Now, here's the thing when it comes to nighttime sounds. I was practically raised in the woods. I've spent a huge amount of time out there, both day and night. I wouldn't call myself a woodsman, mostly because I don't have a flannel shirt unbuttoned halfway down my sternum or a big bushy beard. But all of my experience in the woods and the various sounds you hear in them are the Appalachia, the Pacific Northwest, and New England. I have no real experience with nocturnal animals found in the southwestern United States, which is where this happened. I'm not familiar with desert creatures, though I've heard that Chosen One partied with them occasionally. Since I didn't see anything, I can't tell you what it was. I probably couldn't tell you what it was even if I did see it, but it's the sound. I've heard all kinds of nocturnal animal and insect sounds, and I can identify a good number of them, but whatever this was, it chilled me to my bones. I was visiting some friends of mine who live near Van Horn, Texas. One morning, at around 4 a.m, I was outside smoking a cigarette. I started hearing what sounded like a few dogs barking off in the distance. Nothing out of the ordinary. One of their neighbors had 2 or 3 of them. I figured they had just seen some type of animal or something that had gotten them excited. Thing was, as I continued to smoke, I started to pick out something different that was mixed in with their barking. It caught my attention, but nothing more. I just happened to notice it, but over the course of the next couple of minutes, the dog stopped barking, but there was still that same sound. It was gradually drawing closer to where I was. If I had to describe it, I would say it was something trying to sound like a dog, but not quite getting it right. It continued to slowly move closer until it sounded like it was right inside the nearby tree line, about 30 feet away from me, and, of course, just far enough away to not be within reach of the exterior light on the side of the garage. What struck me is that the sound seemed to be coming from higher than I was tall, but I could hear it moving around on the ground. I went inside and stayed there. As I said, I'm familiar with nocturnal animal sounds. I've heard coyote and wolf and bear. That all seemed like they were very close while camping, but this sound scared me. I am really looking for answers because no one has ever heard what I have described to them. Best you can do is go off of my description, and I know my description may be pretty awful. But it sounded like a bad mimic trying to bark. Before we go any further on these encounters, I feel that hearing these creatures scream and the sounds they make sometimes is more terrifying than the sight. I remember the night that I had my encounter, and before we even saw what was in the woods, those screams had 2 out of 4 people, because the 5th was already in the car, and the 5th had started the car just after hearing these screams. Of course, there was a visual with the eyes through the woods, but hearing these cryptid, monstrous screams and not seeing something is just as terrifying. When I was just up in Horrifying the other day, and I was walking through the woods, and I could hear something on both sides of me trailing me, I was terrified. I didn't know what was behind me, but it was still terrifying. I don't know if I would have been more scared if I had seen it or what, but I know, judging from the sounds of what was behind me, I did not want to turn around. So a lot of these audible experiences are very terrifying. Today's third experience. To start off, I'd like to share that this is 100% a true experience. I'm not too sure what I encountered, but for some context, I live in southern region of Colorado. This encounter was near the Spanish Peaks in a public hunting area about 2 hours away from where I live. I was hunting there alone for about 2 years before this had happened, and I haven't been back there since then. There's a big clearing at the start of the public land area, and a dirt road going through it to the woods, which takes you to a sort of valley. I was tracking a group of mule deer there for about a month, and knew there was a small stream where they bed down in the afternoon, so I decided to head up there about noon and wait for them at the small rock ledge facing the stream. I got there at around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. This was about a mile through some dense woods to get there. I sat down and unpacked my backpack to get some food and water, sat there for about an hour and saw nothing. So I decided to move up the valley to find them. It's then that I noticed that it was getting a little darker outside when I realized it was maybe an hour and a half until dusk. Then I noticed the woods around me had gone completely silent. No birds, no squirrels running along the forest floor, no wind, absolutely no sound at all, to the point where the loudest thing was my own footsteps, and this got me very uneasy, and my gut was telling me to leave. I stopped for a second to listen for anything. It was then that I heard the same sounding footsteps I was making, and I know the difference between what different animals sound like when walking through the woods, but these were eerily human. They started to get louder and pick up in speed at the point I got up and started to run as fast as I could to the road, which is still almost a mile away. It took longer than it should have to get there, and I don't know how long I was running for, but I know I ran almost full sprint the whole time. It may be my imagination, but I swear I could hear footsteps behind me the whole while. By the time I reached the clearing and saw my car, the sun was about to set, and it was almost too dark to navigate the woods. I bolted to my car, and when I got in, I absolutely kid you not, there was a deer at the end of the clearing sitting there, just casually walking back into the woods where I had just been at. It was the most intense adrenaline-filled experience I had ever had, and I'll never go back there again. Not even with people. Today's fourth experience. This happened to me 8 years ago, but surely something I'll always remember. My grandfather made it clear that I should never talk about what we experienced, and that I should just forget it even happened. But I feel like I won't ever let go of this memory if I wouldn't be able to release it. Anyway. I was 11 at the time, it was summer, and usually we'd go to our vacation home, which I'd say is pretty secluded. We don't have any close neighbors, and the house is literally in the middle of the woods. I've never disliked going there. as it's close to a river with a waterfall, which, by the way, looks straight out of the Garden of Eve. My parents let me stay in the house with my grandfather as my mom and dad were on a business trip. I remember them promising they'll follow as soon as they get back from their trip. My grandfather picked me up at around 2 p.m. in the afternoon. The drive was around 3 hours. Evening arrived, and we were just halfway through because of a major car crash. We were stuck in traffic for a pretty long time. We almost had finished 10 radio dramas while waiting through the traffic. We were finally driving up the mountains, which means we were close. But the road is insanely dark and covered with trees. There are some parts of the road where it looked like we were driving through tunnels, as the tree branches were covering the sky. Then a loud thud broke the silence between the two of us. My grandfather had hit a big rock that was sitting in the middle of the road, like someone had intentionally put it there to cause an inconvenience. This caused the car to smoke, and it turns out that our clutch overheated. My grandfather decided that we'd spend the night in the car, as he was very tired, and he's not very good at driving in the dark. I was also pretty tired, so I was ready to fall asleep. My grandfather said that he was going to get his pillow and flashlight in the compartment of the car. I was listening to him move and arrange our stuff, and then I fell asleep. I wasn't sure how long I had been sleeping, but woke up from the sound of scratching under the car. I was 100% sure that I'm going to forget it and just sleep in. But as I wandered my eyes, I saw one small dash of light in the dark road. It was my grandfather facing a tree, pointing his flashlight in the total black of nothingness. I thought he had also heard that scratching sound and was looking for it. I was about to get out of the car and call him back into the car because I was scared. But suddenly I noticed that his neck is unusually long and has a patch of hair running through his whole neck. I knew something was wrong. I started to observe and look around the car. I'm panicking, and there I saw my grandfather, covered in blankets, sleeping in the back of the car. I quickly woke him up and told him what I saw. He quickly dismissed it, saying that maybe I was dreaming or I was just too tired. But I knew he was also scared from what I had just told him, and he tried to stay calm so I wouldn't panic. Just a few minutes later, the scratches were back, and it got louder. And there was thudding under the car like someone smashing their hands under it. I was panicking. My eyes were filled with tears, where my vision was all blurry and my head was hurting from the anxiety. My grandfather heard all of this. This time he was awake and more alert. He said there may be squirrels or rabbits under the car, and he'd go check it out, which I quickly opposed, as I've seen this stuff in horror movies and it never goes good. And I was also so scared to be left in that car for a second. As soon as he opened the door, the flashlight, where whatever that thing I saw in the woods lit, I was so scared. It was lying on the floor. The light was facing our car. Then I heard the scariest sound I'd ever heard in my life. It was my mom's voice singing. We both knew that whatever this thing was not my mom. The voice sounded disgusting and distorted. The voice was stringy. It sounded like it was pretending and trying to imitate human language. The voice lasted for a minute, and the parts sounded so terrifying as it sounded like it's shrieking from pain, but almost like laughing at the same time. He closed the door, locked all of them, and sat in the driver's seat. He was shaking. We shared an eye contact. He was pale and looked terrified. We were both sitting in pure fear and silence, as the radio signal wasn't that clear in this area. That night we drove back home, and he told me to always forget everything that happened and to pray every night. Tonight's final experience. This incident took place about 93 in Limrock, Alabama. There were, I think, 6 of us in our group. Cave entrances in the southeast are usually formed at the contact between the sandstone cap and the limestone layer beneath it. So we normally hike in from the bottom of the mountain, then contour around the hillsides at the sandstone-limestone contact until we reach the cave. On this particular trip, the cove was fairly remote, and there wasn't good access to the hillside from the bottom. So we had gone in from the top, leaving our trucks off the road on the ridgeline. We'd only just begun contouring around the hillside when we found two oddities, a sapling 9 inches in circumference, and we measured it, that was broken 6 feet up the trunk. The top part of the sapling had been twisted around 360 degrees, and the top was pointing downhill. The break was so fresh the wood was greenish and looked wet with sap. About 10 feet directly uphill was a little teepee, about 14 inches tall, made of sticks. So many sticks that had been used that the walls were nearly solid. We stopped and considered these oddities for a bit. Options of their origin ranged from a Bigfoot did it, my opinion, to a crazy wind vortex that didn't move anything else near the sapling, including the leaves beneath it, and maybe a little kid was miles from the nearest home and decided to make a doll-sized teepee in the woods. We also noticed that there were large areas in which every sapling and bush was arched over, with the arches all pointing downhill. This is also associated with Sasquatch, but there were so many of them that I suspect it was something more along the lines as wind and ice, or really, really obsessive-compulsive Sasquatch. As we hiked, we began to hear wood knocking pacing us. If you've ever heard it, it sounds like an axe hitting a tree. It was always 2 knocks, always about 100 feet uphill from us. About every 5 minutes, we'd hear the crack, crash, and thump of a tree falling just on the other side of the ridgeline, always directly uphill from us. It's not uncommon for us to hear the sound of wood knocking, always 2 above us. Sometimes, on other trips, 3 knocks would answer the 2 from across the cove or down the hillside. And the tree crashing pace us when we hiked to the caves. I remember once hearing it on 3 different hillsides in one weekend. It's always directly uphill from us, keeping pace with us. Anyway, as I said, we heard it pretty frequently, so, as always, we ignored it and continued hiking. All was fine until one of the guys in the group shoved over a dead, rotten tree stump about 8 feet tall. Within seconds of the dead tree hitting the ground, it sounded like all hell had broken loose up above us on the hillside as trees started falling one after another. For the next 5 minutes, it was continuous crack, crash, boom, crack, crash, boom. We stood there stunned. Even the Bigfoot non-believers had fear in their eyes, and we nervously acknowledged to one another that we had seriously ticked something off up here. We decided we'd better get moving, and we hiked at a much more rapid pace to the cave. For the rest of the hike, we were pelted with dirt and pebbles and occasionally smallish rocks. The cave had a pit entrance, and I've never been so worried that something was going to mess with our ropes. Upon exiting the cave about 5 hours later, we found our ropes and the gear we had left outside the cave untouched. We didn't hear anything unusual on the hike back to our trucks, but then we never hear this stuff hiking back to our vehicles. We only hear it hiking to the caves. I think the knocking is a sentinel signaling to the other Sasquatch in the location. The tree crashing is almost certainly a threat display. I've often wondered why we hear the knocking and the tree crashing so often on caving trips and rarely on other types of hikes. I suspect part of it is that we aren't armed, so they don't feel they need to hide as completely. Also, my group always hiked unusually fast, and a group of people with ropes and packs marching purposely through their territory might be a cause to alert the rest of the group. The knocking always comes from above us on the hillside, and I think it makes them cranky if we surprise them by hiking in from above. In both this incident and the one where something threw large rocks at us and followed us bellowing into the cave, we had hiked in and above instead of hiking up the mountain from the bottom. I don't know about you guys, but I don't think I'd be hiking to the cave and then go into the cave. I think I'd be hiking back to my car. That's just me. I mean, I don't know. But that's just absurdly stupid in my eyes. But yet, I did go to where Tom Messick disappeared unarmed the other day, so I guess we all do stupid things sometimes, not thinking about it. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed tonight's second half of the upload. And with that, I want to thank everybody for always supporting the channel. And I hope that the Great Spirit watches over us all and that He guides us through that path that we call life. Until tomorrow, my friends.